What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to be rating your guys' wildcard drafts. So yes, it's that time again. Asked on my Twitter page at DavyFPL for your guys' current drafts, and I selected about 4 of them. Now, as you know, I never like to kind of repeat content on this channel, so these 4 drafts are slightly different to one another. What I try to do is go over all the drafts that you guys did send over and kind of group them according to certain formations or certain players that the majority of that group had picked. So I ended up with 4 drafts, and as I always say, I do apologize if I didn't cover your specific wildcard draft, but what you can do is just maybe look at the drafts in this video and relate it to the one that's closest to yours, and then just take my advice on that specific team. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So before we get onto the 4 different drafts, I wanted to talk to you guys about this little bit of a template that is currently forming around the wildcards. So I won't lie to you, most of the players in these 4 drafts are quite similar, or at least a couple of them are exactly the same, and I saw these players throughout every single draft. We almost have the Chelsea Man City defense, we have the Mo Salah and Rafinha midfield, and then in the forward department, 100% Lukaku. Antonio's in a lot of drafts, but then we have the variation of either going with Raul Jimenez, Hwang, or going for Tony from Brentford. So I've basically summed up every single wildcard draft for game week 8, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, these players are so highly owned in the wildcards because they are strong performers. So I mean, just because they're a template pick doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be a bad pick. Just look at game week 1. Game week 1, most kind of FPL content creators had a similar draft. Most of the people on FPL Twitter had a similar team, and it ended up banging over the first 2 game weeks. So not the end of the world if these are template, but I just wanted to talk to you guys through kind of a wildcard template that I did see was kind of forming, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but maybe if you want to go a little bit different, you can, and there might be some nice room to move in if you guys do want to go super different. That being said though, these 4 drafts do have a kind of different elements to them, some surprise entries as well. So as I said, I try to make these 4 drafts as different as possible to make this video a little bit more interesting. So going on to the first draft, that's going to be Paxo FPL, and the reason why I wanted to cover this draft first of all, it's because he has an overall rank of about 150. I think it was 153 or 154 to be more exact, but I mean 150 overall rank is absolutely insane, and that's probably the reason why I'm covering his draft in the first place. So sorry Paxo, not saying that your kind of wildcard draft was uninteresting, but I think at that high of a rank you deserve to get the recognition, so make sure you guys go check him out over on Twitter. But in terms of his wildcard draft, it was quite a template wildcard draft to be honest, and that's why I kind of wanted to go over it first, just so that we can get kind of these picks out the way, but I still really do like it. I mean, if you guys did watch my initial wildcard draft, you would have seen that this team is super similar to my initial draft, but now I might be slightly moving away from this. I mean, Human Son, we just have had the news of Newcastle getting bought, the new owners coming in, so I mean, new manager bounce, forget about that, we have new owner bounce now, so I'm pretty sure that Newcastle game, because it is at home for Newcastle, going to be absolutely rocking there. So you might want to rethink going with the Human Son, because I don't know if maybe Newcastle will raise their game for these new owners. But how I'm going to start off these kind of wildcard ratings or wildcard reviews is I'm going to talk about the overall structure of the team, and that's going to start off with the bench. So the bench here, you guys can see Paxo FPL has a decent bench. The only kind of a little bit of a weird one that I did see was going to be Curtis Jones. So if memory does serve me right, I think that Paxo FPL was a Liverpool fan, but he can correct me in the comments down below. I do apologize if I have labeled you as a Liverpool fan and you're not. But in terms of Curtis Jones, I can kind of understand it from an element. I mean, at 5.0 million, unfortunately, there's not too many midfielders to kind of go for, but I just don't know about Jones. He has seemed to be starting for Jurgen Klopp's starting 11 recently, but I don't know if I would go for him as kind of a long-term pick, because you must remember that on a game week 8 wildcard, you don't really want to be spending those free transfers up until the halfway point of the season on a bench player. So that's why maybe if you can find some budget here, maybe downgrade a Trent if he's not fit, you could upgrade Curtis Jones to a better, more secured option. The next 2 bench options, the 2 defenders, the cheap budget enablers that most people are kind of going for, those 2 players are perfectly fine. Duffy for Brighton, although he might not be the best long-term option, I think for the foreseeable future, Brighton have been defending well, and I don't think Duffy's going to go anywhere out of that starting 11. Livramento is another option that has come into the Prem, come into that Southampton side and really impressed. So I think that these 2 options are perfectly fine, especially if you have to squeeze as much budget as possible out of your bench. So I guess with the bench, the only problem I have maybe is with Curtis Jones, but if Jones manages to nail down a starting 11 place, I mean 5.0 million for a Liverpool starter is a kind of cheap change for what you're probably going to be getting. And now going on to the starting 11, and as I did mention, it is a little bit of a template wildcard, or at least I've seen quite a few people go for this. And in terms of the template, what I'm talking about is going for the Chelsea, Liverpool, and Man City defense, going for Salah, Rafinha, and then Heung-min Son, and then going for the forward department of Lukaku, Antonio, and then Hwang. But I actually do like this kind of template wildcard. I think it's going to be a very good performer over the upcoming game weeks. I think the only debate comes in where if you rather would go for a fourth defender over maybe a Smith Rowe, I mean, maybe that could be a better option to go for, but I can understand it that most managers usually favor the attacking side of things, and that's why I think it might be a little bit safer to go with a kind of a fourth midfielder instead of a fourth defender. My only concerns about this team as well is Smith Rowe and Hwang. I don't really think they're the kind of most outstanding options and the most nailed options, to be honest. Yes, I do think the Wolves attacker will probably start for the foreseeable future, but I mean, if he does get benched and you have to rely on one of your other bench options, that might not be the best kind of situation in the world. But what you have done here, Paxo FPL, is that you've set up your starting 11 with some good formational price kind of categories. So your defense is on the more expensive side, but you can always chop and change that. Your midfield department has your premiums, your mid-range, and your entry options. And your striking department has that kind of Antonio price bracket and the Lukaku price bracket where you can upgrade or downgrade them as you do please. So I don't really have anything bad to say about this wildcard draft. I mean, Paxo FPL is a lot higher ranked than me in this current season, so we should be going to him for advice rather than him coming to myself. In terms of upgrades, I think the obvious one is that if Trent is not back to full fitness, I think that Paxo will either go with Diaz or Azpilicueta. That'll also give you enough money to maybe upgrade one of your bench options or upgrade a Smith Rowe or a Hwang to another option. In terms of the Chelsea and the Man City defenders, perfectly fine with that. Those would be my two choices if I had to go for a Chelsea and Man City defender, only one of them. Rudiger, most nailed. Chelsea's rotation seems to be quite strong, and with Cancelo offers that massive attacking threat over maybe someone like a Diaz. The one thing also to note coming back to that bench is Rafinha for game week 8. There's been some talks about him potentially missing the Southampton away game because Brazil play that game on Friday in the early hours of the morning. So I mean, if Rafinha doesn't feature, I mean, Shane Duffy or Livramento can easily deputise for them. I would probably prefer the Norwich fixture for Duffy, but I mean, I'll leave that up to Paxo FPL if push comes to shove and Rafinha misses game week 8. Now going on to our next wildcard draft, it's from D Guppy. I think it was Declan if memory serves me right. So we're going to be looking at Declan's draft in this kind of talking point, and it's a little bit of a formational change here. We've got a 4-3-3, but we do have kind of a modular setup. We could always play Mbumo over one of these defenders or these attackers. I just think with that Brentford fixture against Chelsea, I would probably be avoiding them for this specific game week. Although Brentford have been quite strong going forward and from a defensive department, I just think Chelsea are probably the worst fixture with City to have at the current moment. The other options on the bench, we've got Douglas Luiz, my personal favorite 4.5, because currently is nailed in that Aston Villa lineup and he has pretty good stats for that price point. Livramento has another return here, and I'm pretty sure most wildcarders will probably have the Southampton fullback because he's just so cheap and he still is providing those FPL points. But in the starting 11, I mentioned the formational change, and we've got a kind of big at the back in a back four. We've got Azpilicueta, Diaz, Cancelo, and then also Trent Alexander-Arnold. Ramsdale, yet again, like Paxo FPL, seems to be a really popular keeper option at the current moment. Now, if you guys have watched the news on Brighton with Basuma, I'm not going to mention what happened to him, but there have been some rumors that he could potentially be missing a couple games in the future. And if Basuma is going to be out as one of the best kind of CDMs in the Premier League at the moment, I think that might sway me away from going for Robert Sanchez and opt for the Arsenal goalkeeper of Ramsdale. I do like Azpilicueta as my Chelsea defender, but I might go for Rudiger just to save a little bit of budget, and also I think that Rudiger might be slightly more nailed than Azpi is. But I mean, going on to the Man City options, no complaints there. Diaz, Cancelo, 100% the best options to go for from a Man City point of view, and both do offer some attacking threat. Declan also included Trent, so this is another talking point of just monitor his playing time. If Klopp comes out and says that he will be fit for Watford, 100% I'll also be getting him on my wild card, but if he's not, that's going to open a whole new kind of debate. Are you going to bench Trent for one game week, or are you going to go for someone like a Rudiger? Declan has also gone for a nice 3 in midfield. He's got Doucouré from Everton. A lot is up in the air of which Everton midfielder to kind of go for. I would probably say he's got it right here. I think Doucouré is the best midfielder to go for just because he's the most nailed out of those options, and he is getting some good stats for a midfielder. He's also gone for a Man City midfielder with Foden, which I really like to see. I think that Foden is going to have a great season overall. You're just going to maybe have to be a little bit patient with Phil. I think that he might get benched every now and again, but when he does play, it's basically assured FPL points. Salah, Lukaku, nothing much to talk about there. The two more essential premiums to have. But then we go on to some variation there. We've actually got Tony from Brentford. He's opted for the Brentford double up, which I would recommend from Game Week 10 onwards. But unfortunately, because the bench isn't the greatest, I've decided to play Tony, whereas Declan might opt to play Livramento or someone like that. He might actually do with no Leeds attackers. But I decided to just play Tony because I think from an attacking point of view, offers the best threat going forward. Antonio, another option here. With Antonio, it's a little bit of a debate on a wild card because of these West Ham fixtures coming up that don't look that great. But the thing about Antonio, though, is that he pulled out of the Jamaican international break to focus on West Ham, which I think is commendable. And I honestly do think as long as he is fit and not injured, he scores FPL points all the time. I really do like this kind of four at the back. I think the options from Man City, Chelsea and Liverpool from a defensive point of view are excellent as they offer that defensive threat but also that attacking threat going forward. Now going on to our next draft from Serene Spirit 91. Starting off with the bench, we've got Omobad Medeli as a new entry. Apologies if I am mispronouncing that name. I've been told quite a few times that I am. I just can't really catch on to how you should pronounce it. But in terms of his playing time, I would not have the Norwich defender, unfortunately, because he's not guaranteed to start. I honestly don't think he'll start many of the upcoming game weeks. And I think on a wild card, there's enough cheap options to go for from a defensive point of view that you might as well get a full starting bench. Livramento, Mbumo, nothing much to talk about there. We've already spoken about these options quite a bit. But in terms of the starting 11, we have some variation here. And the variation comes in terms of the defense. We've gone for a Chelsea double up and one Man City option. 100% fine with that if you don't want to get Trent. If Trent's not fit, I would recommend going with this. But the midfield department is really where things kind of shake up. We've got Grealish and we also have Phil Foden. Now with these two options, I've seen the strategy over on Twitter. The thinking behind this is basically that Foden and Grealish will be competing for that left wing spot or that left-sided spot. So you're probably going to be getting one start every single game week out of the two of them. Now I don't know if Phil Foden might play another position. Maybe Grealish plays on midfield. But I just think that it's a little bit risky having both of these options with that much price in them when only one of them will probably start in the starting 11. But I do really like kind of going with this double up. I've seen some people maybe go with the Ferran Torres or maybe going with the Mahrez and then kind of doubling him up with a Grealish / a Foden, which I do like because you're probably going to get one or two starts every single game week. But I mean, if you really do want to get an assured starter, maybe go with this combination because as I said, both kind of competing for the same position. So every single game week, you probably will get one start at least. With the front line, Serene Spirit has taken Antonio out and opted for Raul Jimenez and a Tony. 100% fine with that. I think that Antonio's fixtures are quite tough. So if you need to squeeze as much budget as possible out of your forward department, then these three options are perfectly fine to go for. The only thing, as I've mentioned continuously, is this kind of Man City double up. I don't really know if I would kind of look at that. Maybe you could look at another option at that price point, but there hasn't been that many kind of standout midfielders at that 8 million price point. So I can understand why you are going for two Man City midfielders, but I just think this might be too risky for me and I might maybe opt for a kind of a fourth defender than going for a double up from the Man City midfield. In terms of the rest of the team, perfectly fine with it. I think the structure of the squad is quite nice. And also you might want to downgrade one of the midfielders in the future to upgrade one of your other departments. And you do have that possibility here. Then go on to the final draft of the video. We've got Trond987, and yet again we have a nice back four formation, and I am really favoring this back four because I think the Chelsea and the Man City options, including Trent, if you want to also go from just sub one of those kind of players out, I think the defense for these upcoming game weeks has extremely good value per million, and that's why I'm almost favoring going with a 4 or a 5 at the back. Stay tuned for another draft coming up probably tomorrow as you guys are watching this video. That'll revolve around the kind of big at the back formation. But starting off here, my kind of two Man City and Chelsea options of choice as Piliqueta, Rudiger, Cancelo, Diaz, 100% fine with them. I think they will get lots of points in these upcoming games. Ramsdale on goal, perfectly fine with that situation. I think there's probably 3 or 4, 4.5, 4.6 goalkeepers that you guys can go for that are perfectly adequate on a wild card. The bench is also very similar to other drafts. We've got Mbumo, we've got Livramento, and then you also have Brownhill. Now Brownhill, the only thing about Brownhill and the Burnley midfielder is that he is on a suspension tightrope. So yes, he's picked up about 4 yellow cards. I think 5 yellow cards is a ban. So just make sure that you guys have some coverage if you need to play Brownhill. But considering this bench, perfectly adequate to have Mbumo and also Livramento. Brownhill will probably be third on your bench most game weeks. Trond has then gone for the kind of template midfield of Rafinha, Son and Mo Salah. 100% fine with all these options. The only thing is a Heung-min Son. Newcastle up next, which is probably a good fixture on paper. But then in game week 9 and 10, I don't think the fixtures are too great for Spurs. But I can understand Heung-min Son because, as I always say on a wildcard, you want 1 or 2 punts, and with Son's ownership not being that high, I can understand why you might want to go for the South Korean. And the striking department is also pretty template. Hwang, Antonio, and Lukaku, I've seen them in many people's drafts, and I do think this is kind of a nice safe option to go for. And the reason for that is that if you do look at Tron's team, most of these players are assured starters. The only variation you could actually do is you could do a 4-4-2, swap Hwang out for Mbumo, and I mean, that's perfectly fine from game week 10 onwards. So I guess it doesn't even matter if Hwang does lose his spot because you do have some coverage on the bench. Overall, really like this draft. As I said, I'm a big fan of the kind of 4 at the back with the Chelsea and the Man City defenders because I think from a value point of view, great value per that million in these upcoming game weeks. But this is basically wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did and subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. Comment down below your wildcard draft or which wildcard draft you think was the best in this single video. I'm going to be coming up with loads of content next week, including my team selection and my final wildcard draft going into that game week 8 deadline. I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.